What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video today, and in this video we are doing the 73rd installment of Retro Reviews. Today we're going to be reviewing my Aeroclassics 1:400 scale Delta Airlines Douglas DC-10-10. This is a very, very lovely model and one that was previously extremely rare on the secondhand market, but it has become extremely rare on the secondhand market again because this Aeroclassics release flew off shelves. So this will be one of those retro reviews that has a lot more story time to it than like an actual review. So hopefully you guys can bear with me on that. But I like telling stories. That's the type of person that I am. So when the Aeroclassics releases for February got announced on the 7th, I saw this Delta DC-10 on there, and I was very tempted by it. I sat on the decision for a while because it was $60 with shipping on Aeroclassics Direct. So I thought about waiting for Jet Collector to post the Aeroclassics releases because they always do them the next day at like 10 a.m. Central Time or something like that. So I initially went with that, but then I really wanted it, so I went back to Aeroclassics Direct thinking that, well, the shipping at Jet Collector is probably going to be like a, what, $1, $2, $3 difference. It's not going to equate to much. So I got it from Aeroclassics Direct, and not long after that, it sold out. So I think I got the last one in stock from them, which is very cool and very lucky for me, because I don't know what I would have done if it had sold out from there, but I think I probably would have just gotten it from Jet Collector the next day anyway. So the model arrived in about a couple weeks later. It arrived after the President's Day holiday, on the same day that my Frontier 737 arrived in, because yeah, that one was originally supposed to arrive before the holiday, but then USPS got the package. It was delayed. It got stuck in halfway through its transit process, so it didn't arrive until afterward. But thankfully, we had a really big cold snap happen. The polar vortex just dove through the middle of the country, and it stranded me home for a couple days because you don't want to be driving in extremely cold conditions when it's like 30 to 40, even 50 below zero with wind chills in that field. The last thing you want is your car to break down in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, that cold snap got me stranded, and I was able to unbox both of those very lovely models as soon as they arrived. And I have a retro review on that Frontier if you want to go check it out. It is in the 65th installment, I think, is the one that I did it on. We are on 73, so it would have been about 2 months ago now. And this is the last of the retro reviews that I'm recording during my spring break here in the middle of March. So trying to get ahead just to get through the rest of the semester. I'll talk a little bit more about that here at the end of the video. But to start off the box review, we have the Aeroclassics logo with a nice white shadow. Kind of reminds me of what I used to do with the thumbnails back in the day before I introduced that highlight. And now I do the strokes around the text, that like black outline, which you will see here when we look at the aircraft's history towards the end of the video. We have the American and the Mexican flags, Tri-Jet 10s of the Americas, 1:400 scale. This is a box that they have kept around for quite some time. But this is the first Aeroclassics DC-10 that I've gotten, so I'm not really familiar with this box, but it is very cool. On the bottom, we have an Eastern Chrome, which was announced in that same release, and then a National DC-10. And on this side, we have the aircraft information. Item number is BBX41651. So this is released as a blue box model, but just for simplicity and continuity reasons, I'm labeling this as an Aeroclassics model. And then we have the Delta livery on there. Registration November 602 Delta Alpha. There's the top of the box with the Mexicana DC-10 variants. There's the one on the right there. The left one is the Aero Mexico in that orange livery. And on this side, we have Continental Meatball and the Delta Widget. And on the back, you have a nice collage of all the planes along with a atlas map of the United States and the rest of North America. So very cool design that they have on this box. And that will bring the model into view. So the Delta DC-10s, they were a very interesting type for the airline because they were originally not supposed to have them. But when they had the L-1011s on order in the 1970s, they had an issue with the engine program. Like Rolls-Royce was entering bankruptcy, so that meant the L-1011 program had to undergo a significant delay. So in the meantime, Delta got, I think it was about 5 or 6 DC-10s, so that they could just have that gap filled in until the TriStars were ready. So once they took those, they were sent off to United. So we'll take a look at the real-life aircraft's history in more detail, of course, here after this review. And then Delta got the DC-10s again when they merged with Western in 1987 and they had a really healthy fleet of them, those were sent off not long after because obviously they had the TriStars and the MD-11s were not far behind by about maybe 7 or so years. So now let's take a look at this very, very awesome model right here. Very rare one at that, and certainly is about 3 times the value of what I paid for it initially now, as of this video coming out. Starting off, we have the black nose cone, then we have the cockpit windows. There's the Delta widget with the Delta titles underneath it. This is, of course, a very early iteration of the Delta widget livery. And then there's the Delta tail right there, or the Delta titles, rather. There's the navy blue cheat line, and that landing gear, which does roll, but want to be very careful with these Aeroclassics landing gears because they will easily fall off if you roll them more than 6 inches, which is kind of what I'm doing here, but trying to keep it within that range. There's the engines, which do have the Delta widget printed on them on that white. And then on the back, there's the American flag, registration November 602 Delta Alpha, and you also note little DC-10 text printed behind each of the doors, except that L1 door up there. So it's behind the L2, L3, and then the L4 doors. And then we have the Delta tail with the Delta titles printed on the engines and the fleet code printed at the top of the tail above the widget. And then we'll flip it over to the other side, where we don't have much else different here. We do have a lot of panel details under there. That's very cool. And a couple luggage doors. And there's a good look at the gear, of course. And then the tail on that side of the aircraft, along with the very lovely APU and the exhaust back there. Very awesome model for sure. Now we'll flip it underneath. We have the bottom of the aircraft with the landing gear door outlines. There's also a stand hole and other panel details featured here. The bottom is polished very well. It stands out. And then the top of the aircraft, we just have that beacon up there, no antennas, since that is Aeroclassics policy to never include antennas. And I should mention with the registrations, if you want to tell which DC-10 Delta had with regards to the timing of it, the ones that start with November 60 Delta Alpha, so it'd be like 601, 602, and I think it went up to like 605 Delta Alpha. Those are the original DC-10s that they got when they were waiting on the TriStars, and then the ones they got from Western had November 9er, 9er14 Whiskey Alpha. So the Whiskey Alpha suffixes, those are the ex-Western DC-10. So just a little trivia there if you ever see an old photo of a Delta DC-10 anywhere, then you can tell if it's an early iteration or later iteration. And of course there's also a difference in the livery as well, which would be more obvious to those that don't have that trained eye for little, tail numbers like that, because it is kind of hard to see on this model. So now we'll take a look at the real-life aircraft's history. She first flew on September 26, 1972, and was delivered to Delta in November of that year. So after Delta got all the TriStars, or they had a sufficient amount in their fleet, she went to United in April of 1975 and was registered November 1834 uniform for the rest of her career. So she would have had the smaller Solbass titles the first time around. Then she went to Canada for a little while to CP Air in March of 1983. So she had the very nice orange and polished livery. And then in March of 87, Nordair and Pacific Western merged with Canadian Pacific, or CP Airlines, and that formed Canadian Airlines. So that would have been just the big Canadian airline to compete with Air Canada at the time. But she wasn't in the fleet for more than a month because she went right back to United afterward. And then she flew with United for the rest of her career and was scrapped in 2002. And I don't think this DC-10, well, she did have the Battleship Gray livery towards the end of her existence, and that was the last livery that the DC-10s wore. They never got the Blue Tulip. And funnily enough, Aeroclassics has made this model with United Battleship Gray colors, so that is very cool. And I imagine that one is also extremely rare. So that's the real-life aircraft's history, and before I end this video, I know it's kind of run a bit long here than my normal retro reviews. I do want to talk a little bit about the future for this series and whatnot. Not going to be anything too serious, but as you've noted, the retro reviews, they've been pretty diverse, and I've pre-recorded all of these during my spring break because I just wanted to get ahead and get all the retro reviews done through at least the middle of May, so get me a few extra weeks of insurance in case something else comes up and I have to deal with that. So that way you guys still have at least one video a week for the retro reviews on Wednesdays. So this is the last that I'm pre-recording, and will be the last I'll record for a little while. I'll do a couple more probably in like April or May when I get close to finishing up my classes for the spring semester. I'm anticipating a very busy schedule during the April and May window, so if the schedule's been a little spotty prior to this, then that's why, but I'm hoping it doesn't get too spotty if so. But yeah, moving forward with retro reviews, I'm excited for Airliners International in Atlanta, so kind of fitting I do a Delta model when we're about a month out, and I will do my TriStar that week of Airliners International, so super excited about that. And I'm hoping to acquire some very exciting retro models from that convention so that I have even more subjects to do for retro reviews. So again, that show, June 25th through 28th at the Delta Flight Museum. Going to be an awesome time, and I hope you guys are able to go on out because Atlanta's more accessible than Kansas City was, so I'm kind of anticipating a significant increase in the attendance this year. Can't say exact figures because I'm not really good at estimating, but I'd say a few thousand or so do attend the show every year, which is really good for a show as niche as Airliners International, which caters to those that collect airline memorabilia and die-cast airplane models. It's kind of the two main audiences, though arguably you could put them together into one because, you know, this is kind of like airline memorabilia, but just a more established form of it, if you will. Like, it has its own characteristics because you have different scales and whatnot of all these different aircrafts and airlines and everything in between. It's a really fascinating hobby, and I'm really excited for the future of it as a whole. So that's enough of me rambling. This video certainly went a little longer than, again, my normal retro reviews would. But that's what I do. I tell great stories, and I like to make some good points. With that being said, that is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.